Donnie and Dolly. The team is supported by ableauctions.ca. Closing your business? We can help.
It is Monday, and all of our guests today, including Cory Schneider, standing by, are brought to you by Basant Motors. It's March mayhem at Basant all month long. Choose either no GST, 4.99% financing on 2020 or newer vehicles, or a $2,000 trade-in bonus. Get all the info at BasantMotors.com. Just before we get to Cory, Lyle in Centerville, Nova Scotia. We're going to have to hire him. Lyle, Delaney's OK Tire and Langley inbox. I'm on the Eclipse Path in Nova Scotia. I didn't know there was such a thing. The weather is clear. Peak time here is around 4:30 local. Will attempt photos.
Nice.
Lyle, our Eclipse reporter in Nova Scotia. You said you wanted to get somebody on to report on the Eclipse. At the very least, looks like Lyle's going to provide some photos.
Lyle's the guy for us.
Lyle is the guy for us.
Photos coming.
Cory Schneider's the guy for us right now. NHL goaltender for 13 seasons, 5 with the Canucks, including the run to the 2011 Stanley Cup final. Now an analyst with the NHL Network. He's also got a podcast with Brian Boyle. It's called One Time All-Stars. And Cory joins us now to talk some hockey. Cory, thanks for doing this, sir. How are you?
Great, guys. How you guys doing?
Good. Very well. Where does that name come from? One Time All-Stars.
Well, Brian and I both played in one All-Star game in our career, so we were just kind of joking that we were the best of the worst or the worst of the best, so we were both a one-time All-Star, so that was sort of where the name came from.
Yeah, well, you both played in All-Star games. It should be two-time All-Stars, Cory, but I'm nitpicking. How's broadcasting going for you, by the way?
It's been good. You know, just coming out of the game, I didn't want to take time completely off, because if you get away from the game for too long, you sort of lose the pulse of what's happening and all the kids and players that are coming to the league now. So I thought it was a good way for me to just, stay with it. I did some Islanders games too, part-time. So doing that in the network, I was able to kind of relax for a year. It's such a grind of a schedule that with your family and your kids, it's been great to be around them and just spend more time at home. But also, like you said, just stay busy enough where you know what's going on in the league and stay up to date on everything that's happening. So it's been a great blend for me just in terms of easing into retirement, I should say.
Are you at the point where you're coaching minor hockey these days with your kids?
Not yet. My son's 8, and he loves it. He loves everything about it. I'm just trying to get him into the playing part a little bit more. So hopefully he seems up for it now that he's ready to get on the skates and maybe play more seriously. So if that happens, then that'll be a fun way to do that, is just to coach him and be around him. But for the most part, I just want to make sure he has fun and don't want to push him into something he doesn't want to do.
Sounds good. Cory, we talked about this in the first segment. There are 10, 11 teams that could win the Stanley Cup right now. I mean, there's so much parity in the league. Do you have any idea who's going to win the Stanley Cup? Do you have a favorite at all? I don't think anybody does.
No, I mean, there's definitely some teams out of that group, but like you said, you look at the West. The West to me is just a nightmare. What a minefield that is to get through. Like I said, I can see 6 teams out of the West who could win it. East, maybe not. I think the East is a little more top heavy. So, for me, my favorite teams in the East, I really like Carolina, to be honest. I think the way they play, I think adding Gensel and Kuznetsov, they've always lacked that kind of sniper finisher in the playoffs, the guy who can win them a game individually. They play such a good team game. So for me, Carolina is kind of my pick out of the East, even though, like you said, Florida, New York, Boston could be any of those guys. And then out West, it's just like pick your poison. I mean, it's, thankfully the Knights have gone to 3rd place, so Vancouver might avoid them in the first round potentially, but like what a treat to win your division, get the Vegas Golden Knights in the first round. So there's going to be 2 or 3 really, really good teams that are going to go home in the first round in the West. That's why it's so hard to handicap. But honestly, right now, and I hate to say this, but I like the Avalanche. I like Colorado a lot if they get healthy. I just think their star power is good, and the additions they made at the deadline with Middlestat and Walker sort of helped them a lot, and they have the pedigree. So if I had to pick a team, I could pick 6 teams, but if I had to pick a team from each side, those would be my 2 teams right now that I think would make it to the finals.
Hey, Cory, out in Vancouver, Thatcher Demko's hurt. It's been 4 weeks, 5 games left. How tough is it going to be for him? It's a knee injury. To come back, play a couple games for the playoffs. Talk a little bit about that and the timing of his injury.
Yeah, it's been tough for them because he was having such a good season. He was back on track. He was looking great. Casey's done a good job, holding down the fort. But again, I think Thatcher is a difference maker. We saw what he did in the playoffs in the bubble against Vegas. So if he can get to that level, obviously it makes Vancouver one of the favorites in my opinion. But it's tough. I mean, I remember one of my years. I think maybe the lockout shortened year. I got hurt going into the playoffs. I got hurt that last week, and Roberto started the first 2 games against San Jose, and I came back in and. It's, I've always made the analogy. It's like jumping on a moving train, especially in the playoffs. So, the train's moving, everyone's on board, and you're sort of waiting off to the side. And you're trying to time it and, get up to speed really quickly to jump on that train. So I don't know if he's going to be back before the playoffs. I think that'd be huge if he can get a couple games in before. But I know for me, jumping right into that playoff action coming off an injury was challenging. So it's not an excuse. You're healthy. You got to play your best. But if they can get him back in there for a couple of games heading into the playoffs, I think that'd be massive for him just to get up to speed and feel at his best going into the playoffs. Because I said, you can't give any games away in the West right now. You can't go down 1 or 2-0 and think you're going to come back against some of these teams.
Corey, the Canucks are still in first place, so they're fighting off the Oilers now. The Oilers are not far behind. But what do you like about the Canucks this year? This is kind of like a season, Corey, nobody saw, but all of a sudden here they are first in their division late in the season.
Yeah, I've been really impressed by them. They got off to the hot start, and everyone was sort of saying, is this sustainable? Can they keep this up? And, in my mind, I didn't know if they could, but you got to give them credit. Their best players have been their best players. They've had elite stretches, of play that they've just never – I watched them live against the Islanders a little while ago, and that, the top line was just dominant. So they have all the ingredients. They're strong down the middle. They got a difference maker with Quinn. And obviously, like I said, if Demko can step up. So they have all the pieces at the important positions. My only concern with them is, and I don't want to say it's lack of experience, but some of these other teams in the West have gone through some dogfights. Colorado won the Cup, obviously, so did Vegas. Dallas has gone far. Edmonton's made it to a couple conference finals. LA's built for the playoffs, so is Winnipeg. So, it's not that Vancouver can't do it, but, they don't have as much playoff exposure in the last few years as some of these other teams do. So, and not to say that may not be a bad thing, but at the end of the day, it's going to be hard to knock off, 3-4 of these teams on the way to get into the final. So it's going to be a challenge for Vancouver.
Hey, Corey, changing subjects for a bit. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday, Kevin BX has said he admitted that the 2011 Canucks wanted a matchup in the Stanley Cup final with Tampa Bay. Instead, the Canucks, as you know, got Boston, and the rest is history. Do you remember that at all?
I mean, I remember we had a lot of time off because we beat the Sharks in 5, and that series went 7. So I remember we're all a little frustrated because we wanted the Stanley Cup to get going. We wanted to play and catch them maybe, but I know with the scheduling and TV, they gave them like a week off, or they got 5 or 6 days to recover before the Cup started, and we had 10 or 12 days off. So I remember we were all eager to get playing, and we didn't like the fact that we had to wait around for a long time. But I don't remember personally actively sort of saying I want this team or that team. I think stylistically, we probably matched up better against Tampa Bay in terms of how we would have done against them. I'm not saying we would have beaten them, but I think Boston, obviously, they ended up being a very good team and a very tough opponent for us in that series. But I can't remember actively guys talking about who we wanted to play or didn't want to play, but I'm sure in the back of our minds, I think we might have been thinking Tampa Bay was a bit of an easier opponent in that sense. But again, you get to the finals, you're a good team, so it didn't really matter. But yeah, again, Boston ended up being a bad matchup for us for sure.
I was hoping you'd rip into BX and say, I don't remember that at all. I don't know what he's talking about. Hey,
Kevin's got a better memory than I do these days, so he probably remembers things better than that.
Hey, what would your reaction be if? And you look at the overall standings and the conference standings. This could happen. What would your reaction be if the Canucks met Boston again in the 2024 Stanley Cup final?
I was just talking with somebody, actually, it might have been Brian, my podcast co-host, just, how we were talking about Marchand. He's the only guy left from that team. Yeah. And, I'm from Boston. I grew up a Bruins fan. Like, all my buddies were back there. So that was a tough series for me personally. I had no allegiance to them, obviously. But I remember after that series, like, I hated the Bruins for a long time, just that group of guys and how nasty this series was. I mean, there are some are great people, the Bergerons of the world and Krejcis and those guys who but for a long time I was kind of rooting for them to not do so well, and when they lost to the Blues and Blackhawks in the finals, I definitely wasn't heartbroken. So there was no love lost between the teams. But now again, that it's I don't know. I'm sure the fans and media would make a lot more of it than the players would, just because it's completely different people. There's nobody left except for Marchand on either side, and I just don't think you see the bad blood nowadays like you did 10, 15 years ago. So I mean, to me, in my opinion, that was the last real sports hate Stanley Cup finals. I haven't seen one since then that maybe some of the Chicago, Tampa ones, but we generally just didn't like each other. So it's kind of a throwback series in that sense. And I just don't know you get that kind of vitriol anymore when teams playing because they all know each other and they're all buddies. But it would be a fun storyline. I'm sure the fans and the media would love it.
Yeah, I think sports misses something from back in the day when teams hated each other. That was and look,
Yeah.
I'm biased, but I mean that was one of the great Stanley Cup finals because it was obvious the two teams didn't like each other. I tell you what, Cory, we'd like having you as a guest. This was great. You got the podcast set up; it's fantastic, and we'll get you back soon. We can't thank you enough.
Great, guys. Yeah, thanks for having us. Let's go get some glasses on and go check this eclipse out. So,
Okay. Thanks, Cory. Appreciate it. Be careful.
All right.